evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CDU Community Forum. Today's subject will be climate change and our community. Our guests today are Nina Knierim, Area Director for Community Organized Relief Effort, or CORE. Our other guest, Akim, Program Coordinator for CORE. And as always, joining us, Dr. David M. Carlisle, President and CEO of CDU. And your host for today, Sylvia Drew Ivy, Senior Special Assistant to the President and CEO for External Affairs.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I can only see my face. Jackie, are the other participants visible? Will they be visible?
They are visible, Ms. Sylvia. We'll make sure that the entire panel is seen. Thank you.
Okay.
Sylvia, you may proceed with the introductions.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. This is a very, very important topic that we're tackling today. We're just going to begin it. I'm sure we're going to have to come back again and talk about it further because our learning curve is high for climate change, and that's what we're going to learn about today. We have two excellent panelists, and we're going to you're going to watch this one today, and you can rewatch it because it will be available to you on the CDU website, along with other community forums that I hope you may have heard or you'd like to listen to in the future. Today, we're going to talk about climate change. For years, the term used to be global warming, but now global climate change is the preferred term since it is more accurate scientifically. While we are here in Southern California and we are noticing the warming aspect of climate change, the impact on other parts of the world is different. You can have a historic drought, like the Colorado River drying up. Kansas and Kentucky are having floods. Just this weekend, Canada, of all places, was hit with a rare hurricane that did substantial damage to residents in that area. But one thing is the same, and that is that negative impacts of climate change in poorer neighborhoods and minority communities are the hardest hit. The lack of trees, the excess concrete in poorer neighborhoods immediately impacts communities, while the economic fallout from climate change also lands more squarely there as well. It's that aspect of global climate change, the local impacts on the most physically and socioeconomically vulnerable populations, that we're going to be discussing today. We have two very special guests. Both come from CORE Response Los Angeles, the local branch of a crisis response organization that brings immediate aid and recovery to underserved communities across the globe. First off, we have Akim, who is Program Coordinator with CORE California's Climate Resistance. I met Akim with the South LA CRESLA effort to deal with COVID, and he's just been a wonderful partner in that enterprise. He also serves as a community mobilizer for CORE Response LA, where he supported providing free COVID testing and vaccine sites throughout LA County. So good to see you again, Akim. Thank you for being with us today and also for introducing us to our second panelist, Nina Nina,
Knierim. Knierim.
Nina, I'm going to
Knie-
call you Miss Nina because
Okay.
I'm,
That's okay.
I'm
Miss
a big,
Nina works fine with me.
okay, I'm sorry. Nina is an expert in this area, and we're delighted to have her join us. She works with Akim in the core response activities. What a great organization that is. Rounding out our panel, as always, is Dr. David M. Carlisle, our recurring medical expert who's been president and chief executive officer of CDU since 2011. Dr. Carlisle is a board-certified internal medicine specialist, published author in health policy, and served as director of the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development for 11 years under 3 different governors. Welcome back, Dr. Carlisle. Thank you all for taking time to join us today to discuss such an important topic. I have some questions to get the conversation started. Time allowing, we will also take questions from the audience before we wrap up. So audience, please make a note of questions that as you're listening to our panelists today. Let me start with you, Ms. Nina. Tell me about your organization and how it is involved in more than just COVID. Tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me today. We're really excited, Akim and I, to join your community and talk a little bit more about climate change, climate action, climate resilience, all those wonderful words, that buzzwords that they roll around. So I will tell you just a quick background on CORE. CORE, you may have heard from the work that we did during the pandemic and during COVID-19, where our organization did respond and did large-scale testing and large-scale vaccinations, did community outreach, which Akim will talk a little bit more about. But our organization has been around for since 2010. And CORE's primary work has been in response and relief to disasters across the world. The 2 earthquakes in Haiti, hurricanes in Puerto Rico, flooding and Hurricane Katrina, and most recently flooding in Kentucky, and now again, another hurricane in Puerto Rico. So you can see that has been the bulk of our work. I'll let Akim talk a little bit more about the work that we have done with COVID-19, again, which you are more familiar with, and is the public health aspect that we were involved in here in Los Angeles.
Great.
Thank you, Nina. And thank you all for having me again. In the past, we spoke about where we are with COVID-19, and I just want to share a bit of what we were able to accomplish. Of course, with a lot of support from our community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, government entities, and establishments like yourself. CORE has been able to provide more than 2.7 million vaccines and over 6.4 million COVID-19 tests throughout the pandemic in Los Angeles County. And I just want to highlight that 60% of our Los Angeles operations are out of South Los Angeles. So with this would not have been able to be accomplished without the network in South LA that we were able to connect with. So I definitely want to share our outcome with COVID-19 and let everyone know what we were able to accomplish then. Though CDU was the first to start it here during the pandemic, the COVID testing. I do want to acknowledge the great work that you all do there.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Carlisle, for your wonderful leadership with COVID. CDU faculty, staff, and students have been really blessed by the attention that you paid in the very beginning to what we could do to get testing. We're still getting testing every day when we come on campus. and you really kept us just remarkably healthy. And now I want to move on to talk about the issue that is threatening us now with global warming. Tell us what the health impacts of all of this heat are. Why do we have to care about it as health providers? Why do our students have to learn what's happening and how they can protect themselves better?
And Sylvia, shall I go ahead and answer that for you?
Yes, please. Mhm.
Okay. I'll provide a fairly long answer because the issues can be immediate from these heat deserts that exist in some of our biggest cities. And no surprise, the biggest heat deserts where you see no trees and a lot of concrete are in typically under-resourced areas where you see the highest concentrations often of populations of color in our cities. They can be heat emergencies. People can literally die from these unusually high degrees of elevated temperature that we're seeing. And in California, we just had our recent heat period. And if you were in a community that where you did not have air conditioning and you were in the midst of that heat, you were directly experiencing a threat to your health, no doubt. This is something that's going to get worse over time. We've seen during hot spells in Chicago, dozens, scores of people, even hundreds die, for example, from elevated heat. Portland, the death rate went up this past summer during a heat wave. So this is an unfortunate immediate byproduct of the climate change that is occurring in this country and nationally. I'd even say that there's a tie-in between COVID-19 and climate change, because what we're seeing and what medical doctors and scientists expect to see is more global pandemics brought about by the increased interaction between wild animals and people, and it's accelerated by climate change. So there's a definite tie-in between the pandemic we just experienced and climate change. That's not just theoretical. And I'll even go into the realm of science fiction, where we are worried about the melting of glaciers and polar ice caps, and whether there might be pathogens that have disappeared from our living memory that might become reapparent as these ice structures start to decline. Things that existed thousands and thousands of years ago that we may have no natural immunity toward right now. I said it's science fiction, but it's only just barely science fiction.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about the heat impact on the health of people. I read that it causes heart problems and strokes and causes premature births. I don't know that the community is aware of these kinds of threats from living in very, very hot neighborhoods. Is that something we haven't done a good job letting people know? This is what can happen from the heat. It's not just that you're sweating a lot.
Well, elevated temperatures can make everything worse. For example, if you're a diabetic and you lose your body volume, your water volume because of elevated temperatures, your diabetes that might be under control can get out of control very quickly. Every condition is worsened, but certainly the most common thing is basically heat stroke, basically. And it's very easy to go from being a comfortable temperature to being overwhelmed by elevated temperatures, literally within a few minutes or hours. And an example of that is being left in a car with the windows up. Within a few minutes, you can actually die from elevated temperatures. So these are real considerations, and they're getting more and more significant with elevated temperatures.
Is that what happens to children when they're left in a hot car?
Absolutely. Children, animals, yes.
No, okay. Mr. Watts, you're often in these communities communicating directly with people about current and coming impacts of climate change. In your experience, are these populations aware of the threat to them and the disproportionate degree at which they're at risk?
You know, a lot of community organizations are, they are aware in our community. I do want to say that. But our community, some of our community members, including myself before joining the climate resilience team, I noticed things. I noticed, you know, the past 10 years, we barely had rain, and seems like our summers extended. Even now, we're going through a small heat wave. But I would say that our community isn't, may not be aware to an extent, how can I say, where we can actually notice how disproportionate our community can be affected by climate change. So, though I would say that a lot of our organizations that we work with or are already doing the work, I would say that they would need more support to be able to respond to these disasters in the area, or potential disasters in the area, and to pretty much have more hands on board to be able to educate those in the community and even empower them to know what's going on by either, you know, joining a volunteer group in the area, even getting on one of these calls, neighborhood council calls, and being involved. But we'll be able to notice more and more, and I believe the community will have more of an interest throughout time, because this is going to continue to impact us. And you know, you guys mentioned already how even, you know, well, underserved communities have lack of shading in the area, and some even say that there's, you know, the rumors are because police helicopters want to see what's going on in the neighborhood, and you know, so there are other rumors that may even seem true, but I do not think that we understand exactly how we are at risk.
This is why I'm so happy we're having the conversation today, and that we may come back, because you're the one that made me aware of the fact that we're not really talking about this. We're a health-focused organization, and it's a health issue. It's not a city, county, state management issue. It's a health issue. And those partners have to help us. But Miss Nina, what is needed? How can we get our community engaged? You know, we're starting today here with the community we reach to talk about it. But how can we get ourselves better engaged?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to take just a quick step back, if I might. One of the things that you referred to earlier was global warming. We've tossed around the term climate change, climate awareness, climate action. There's a lot of terms that are used in the media, in the newspaper, in written journals. And I really want to focus on, as you mentioned, the public health effects of the changes that we're seeing. All that climate change means is the warming that is occurring in our atmosphere across the world is affecting our weather patterns in a way that makes them more extreme. So not only do we see the impacts of weather that's always occurred, we've always had tornadoes, we've always had hurricanes, we've always had floods, etc. But increasing in intensity and in length and in frequency. So the public health problems that are occurring because the weather in its extreme, whether we're talking about heat and the heat island effects that Dr. Carlisle mentioned, whether we're talking about floodwaters and water quality being interrupted and being contaminated, when we talk about drought and the water restrictions and how that affects urban farms, our agriculture and food scarcity. And when we talk about wildfires, of course, we're in California. Everybody knows that we have wildfires, but does everyone know just how much bigger these wildfires are and how much more frequent they are and how closer they're coming to the urban communities? The fire that we just had near in Riverside County that was affecting all of the urban communities and residential areas wasn't in the mountains. It was right here in our city, in the city. So that affects the air quality that we see and the air pollution. So all of those affect our public health in one way or another, whether it's the heat stress that Dr. Carlisle mentioned, the water quality and the health impacts of that, the water restrictions and how that impacts our small businesses and communities in our vulnerable communities and communities of color. And then again, the air quality, which affects everyone. So when we talk about climate resilience, it's really coping with all of these effects that are exacerbated by the climate change that we see and the new climate reality that we're all living in. You don't have to read a newspaper or look on the Weather Channel. You just step outside your front door and you feel it. And that's why it's so important for us to have this conversation today and why we're talking about it. And when Akim mentions the community outreach and the discovery among individuals who are just now understanding, okay, you're right, it's getting hot. You know, what can we do? How can we be part of the solution and not just survive, but thrive, you know, in a new climate reality? I'm not a doomsdayer. I'm not going to be someone that runs around and says the sky is falling. What I am saying is it's changing. And so we need to prepare for that. We throw around words like mitigation, adaptation, preparation. You hear about your go bags and all of those things, but there's much more to it. And our goal is really to make not only an awareness, but give people the responsibility for themselves, their families, their communities, because we are all affected together. First responders, firemen, policemen, you know, even public health and medical professionals like yourselves. We can only treat the problem. We can't help mitigate or lessen the impact on our communities. That is something that we all are going to need to do together. So just rounding up the question there, the resources that we need are individuals, people. You know, when Akim talked about volunteering, it doesn't have to be you're going out and working in somebody else's yard. You're working in your own community's yards or community-centered areas or local schools. You don't have to have a front yard or a backyard. You look at the parkways. That's the area between the sidewalk and the street. Are there trees there? If they're not, you can petition the city to have trees planted for more shade. A lot of people don't know that that's even a program, but it is, and it's free. There's a lot of funding coming from the federal government and the state government. So we are receiving the money. We need to put the programs in to implement these so that we can see that adaptation and coping happen within our communities.
Is CORE our local advocacy organization to do this? Suppose
we are one.
Sorry?
We are one.
You're one. Okay. I mean, suppose people listening say, okay, you know, this information is pretty complicated and a little bit overwhelming, but I would be willing to go out with my neighbors and plant a tree someplace near me where there isn't a tree. Would that be a good response to our listeners?
Yes, absolutely. And we can provide information directly to those organizations, whether it's the city of Los Angeles or community organizations like CORE. We do collaborate with a lot of other organizations, nonprofits. One example is an organization called Tree People, who receive a lot of their funding from very large organizations. So yes, there is some self-knowledge that needs to occur. There is some digging of information that you'll need to find, but together we can help put those resources together on a web page, for instance, within your community, or we're using our own social media, Instagram and Twitter, to put that information out. There are state and organizations like California Office of Emergency Services and also the Office of the Governor, who are literally hiring armies of people to work in this area. So we can't do all the work ourselves. Obviously, that's too much. But our purpose is to educate, to get everyone involved, because it is your life, right? This is all of us. And I think that without putting fear in, we do need to talk about a sense of urgency. And that's really the important point.
Well, I understand that it's an urgent problem, but it's a little overwhelming. Maybe we need some heavy lifters. Dr. Carlisle, you have health policy experience as the director of the Office of Statewide Health Planning. What role can policy play? Is there any kind of policy change that the government officials could undertake that would help us at the community level? Or do we just have to do this ourselves? Do we have to just go out and plant trees ourselves? I mean, is there help someplace for us?
Well, I would say both, and I commend both Nina and Akim for their perspectives, and CORE for its leadership in this effort as well. Clearly, there's the old expression, all change is local. And certainly anything any one individual can do is a step in the right direction, no matter how small it is. I can imagine a small child planting a tree in their backyard, and that tree will grow into a bigger tree as that child grows up. That's a positive step. But even on a macro level, I mean, there have been two big things that have happened in California. And I'm proud to say that California is on the cutting edge here. Just recently, Governor Newsom announced these two measures. Number one, the banning of the sale of internal combustion engine automobiles by 2035. This was a cutting edge announcement, and already other states have agreed to follow suit and do the same thing. That is a big deal for California, given our levels of air pollution locally. The other thing Governor Newsom just announced was the prohibition of natural gas heated homes, furnaces in new home construction in the state of California to eliminate natural gas induced indoor pollution. That's a big deal also. So yeah, whether it is a macro population wide, statewide change, or something that occurs in your own backyard, choosing to walk instead of drive, for example, things like that. We can all make a difference, and collectively together, we can make a bigger difference, because as you heard, this affects all of us in a very significant way. And of course, our future generations as well.
Well, here's an example of how complicated it feels to me. How does a change in combustion engines in cars affect how hot it is in South LA?
Well, these cars are producing hydrocarbon emissions, and those emissions are gases that ultimately lead to increased temperatures as they enter the atmosphere. For example, automobile pollution produces nitrous oxides. Nitrous oxides, the effect of them gets worse as temperatures increase. Ozone, related to automobile emissions, also gets worse when temperatures rise. We see both of those things are key ingredients to California air pollution, which, of course, is concentrated mostly in communities of color in the area of Los Angeles.
Akim, how can at-risk communities prepare themselves for uncommon weather becoming more regular? Is there anything we can do? We're hearing this is a trend up, even though there are some measures being taken at the state level.
Well, absolutely. One of the things that we like to say is to be able to become more resilient, meaning we want to prepare for these things, understand that these are things that are going to happen. So we want to be able to adapt to these changes. And for people like my family and people that aren't really aware of what's going on, I would say expressing it to them in a way where, of course, we're meeting them, meeting people where they are and where we can understand.
Yeah.
And in most cases, it's wording things in a different way. Some people wouldn't know what climate is, the difference between climate and weather. You know, one things I like to say about that is, you know, climate is more like our personality, you know, and weather is more of the mood, of our mood, you know. So weather is more local in our area, and just pay attention to the weather. If you have it on your phone, you can check out the weather right now in Torrance, and then the weather here in I'm in Chinatown now, and at sometimes there's a 10 to 20 degree difference just between the areas.
Why is that? Why is there a 20-degree difference between the two communities?
One is because shading, more cement, and I would say in the South LA community, I'm more toward the city over here, so we get a bit more shading from some of these buildings, and many other reasons that I would pretty much have to look into the weather, how could I say, the patterns of the weather just in this area. But I would say it's gonna take a little bit of time too to kind of notice these patterns if people haven't already been noticing them. And since our government is more involved in what's going on, there's money being put into place. We'll see these things, the impacts over the next few years of what we're doing. That, you know, the changes that are just going to happen over time, and preparing for them ahead of time, I would think is important in learning what we can do just as a neighborhood, checking on our neighbors that may not be as mobile, learning new ways to keep our home cool rather than kicking our electricity price up every summer. And, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I wonder, I wonder how we can hold the government more responsible for where we are now. Ms. Nina, the housing projects didn't have air conditioning built in. They didn't build it in when they built that housing. And doesn't it fall to the government to correct that deficit? We didn't have the same temperatures when the housing was built, 50 years ago, but now we're in a different climate world. And we have to have cooling just like we have to have water. Or we're going to roast.
Yes, ma'am.
Don't you think the government, I mean, some of it is on us, but some of it, the government has to help us, it seems to me.
Absolutely. And you bring up a very good point. From what we call an infrastructure standpoint, and a word that's, again, kind of tossed around, and like, what exactly does that mean? It's building codes, it's zoning for certain areas, it's including in the design and maintenance of buildings, things like temperature control. And when we have buildings like you're talking about that were built, back in the 50s, Los Angeles was also a cooler place, right? So even, beach communities that didn't have air conditioning, a lot of them are also now suffering from the same kind of heat. And it may be 10 or 15 degrees cooler, but it's still a change that they're seeing. So there is accountability from the government, but I hate to say, it's moving slow. It's moving very slow. And while we do have the funds coming down to address things like that, exactly what you're talking about from vulnerable communities and everywhere as an infrastructure, from an infrastructure standpoint, we have just identified, I believe either the governor or the mayor just identified what we call a heat officer, a chief heat officer, or a chief heat czar. And this woman, she's got an impressive background. Her name is escaping me, but that's her job now, to take a look at all of these types of areas where the extreme heat is affecting us and changing the way we're living our lives and seeing the effects of it from, a health perspective, understanding just, day laborers, people who are outside working on construction or working on the roads, or women in cafeterias working, or men in cafeterias working in our schools, 122 degrees in a kitchen where there's no fans and there's no AC. This is just, it's unfathomable. We can't keep doing this. So these are the kind of issues that she is going to be addressing. And as it's probably about 5 years. It should have been done 5 years ago, but nonetheless, at least we have someone now. And I've already written to her with some suggestions. I haven't had a response yet, but I'm going to keep on writing. Because I truly believe that now that we have somebody who's taking charge of this issue in our city, we can begin to make our voices heard from a policy perspective and an activism. As we know, sometimes activism is the way to bring about some change. But yes, absolutely, we can hold our government accountable in those ways, because those aren't things that we can change ourselves. And not everybody can afford an AC, and we can't put in a whole, AC system in a building that you don't own, that you just rent. So yes, ma'am, there's things that we can do there.
Well, Dr. Carlisle, in a health context, the government has paid for many things that we've needed, our vaccines, and can we get the government to sponsor solar reflective roofs so that the heat on our roofs won't be as severe as the temperature around us goes up? Is that something they would consider doing? They provide food when we don't have food to eat.
I would think that this is that's an excellent example of how government through things like building codes that Nina just mentioned, can actually take an affirmative step. I know that there's a controversy now that's kind of quieted down in Sacramento, but was pretty hot just a few months ago, and it was about regulations with regard to solar panel installation and rebates for those who installed solar panels. There was a bill to reduce the benefit of installing solar panels, the financial benefit, and whether this would have disproportionate impacts, negative impacts on communities of color that are less likely to have the funds and resources to install solar panels. So these are just examples of how government is actually involved and engaged already in this debate. I mean, keep in mind, there are entire countries that are looking at their survival. I mean, this is an existential issue for a country like Palau, where a couple of feet of water, sea level rise wipes out the entire country, no more. Country like Vanuatu, same thing. Even Holland, the Netherlands, threatened by seawater rise. We can talk about New Orleans, we can talk about Florida, again, states with high levels of individuals, populations of color, coastal communities in the Carolinas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is real for these populations.
Well,
They are faced with extinction.
I have to stop you and again ask a question. Why does the sea level rise when the temperature goes up?
It's primarily due to the melting of polar ice caps. There is an ice sheet in Greenland right now that is kind of teetering on the brink of release into the open ocean. I forget how big it is, but they're talking several times the size of the state of Texas, for example. If that ice sheet were to melt, sea levels could rise by 2 feet worldwide. This is serious business, and it is imminent, clear, present, imminent danger.
But we in South LA are not going to worry about the sea rising. But
South LA has been victimized by flooding, to be sure. It only takes a little change in sea level to start to see significant redistributions in water patterns throughout urban areas. You can see sewage lines starting to back up. You can start to see rainwater runoff channels starting to back up. You can see our water treatment plant on the coast in El Segundo taken out of action. These things can all impact urban areas in ways that we don't anticipate. It just takes a little bit more water. We've had flooding right here on the Charles R. Drew University campus in the not too distant past. It can happen again.
Akim, it seems to me you mentioned that our sewers were running over in South LA. Is that something connected to climate change, or is that just heavy rain?
Could be both. Well, I'm sure it's a bit of both, and possibly we haven't cleared our drains, and prepared for that rainy season. It was just not too long ago, I remember mentioning that on a call, and it was on Imperial Boulevard where it was flooding, and it just seemed like drains weren't cleaned at that time. That may not be something just a citizen can do. That's more of a macro, more of a city job that needs to be done there.
It's a big public health issue.
Yes.
If water's running out of the sewers in the street and the children are playing there.
Yes.
It just seems like we have to have more community discussions about what's happening with the climate. It's a pretty complicated issue, but we have to begin. We've made so much progress talking about COVID, which we didn't understand anything in the beginning, and now we know a great deal about it thanks to public health officials and the physician community like Dr. Carlisle. We can learn, Nina, can't we learn about climate change? And can't we enlist our young people? They bring such passion to problem solving. How can we enlist the young people to do this?
Yeah, so one of the things that we, out in the field, as we've gone out and talked to other organizations that are passionate about this work, other community leaders, we've done a lot of collaboration, and there is so much energy and passion around this topic. People are in it to understand what can they do. I think there was a period of time where we were all sort of sticking our head in the sand and saying, oh my gosh, this is just, either it's not happening, it's happening, it's a cycle within, our global climate and in the world over hundreds of years. It doesn't really matter whether you believe it's being caused by humans or not. That's a big hot topic within the political environments. Everyone accepts that it is here and it is affecting us today. So what are we going to do about it? And I have seen a lot of acceptance and momentum around that topic once you do get out and start talking. And it is an interesting conversation when you begin to engage just your own family members around it. And some people, depending on their experience, or they're like, oh, there's always going to be, the next disaster or the next storm or the next this or that. And they're right, but they're going to be worse than they have been in the past. And they're going to be more than there have been in the past. So our education, yes, begins with these, talks to people in the community. But how do we get our young people involved in understanding what's going to be their future? One of the things that the governor has also signed in to legislation, and our legislators have passed, is a new curriculum, an actual environmental climate curriculum for K through 12. This is not to be implemented until 2023. But at least it's movement forward that's saying, hey, part of our core curriculum now for our children is to understand what climate change means, is to understand what these changes are, and not to be afraid of them, but to accept that this is our new climate reality. This is the world that we live in. And how are we going to adapt to it? And, what are the jobs of the future going to look like? So, some of the advice that I can offer is that engage in the conversation. Don't be afraid of it. It's not like politics where if you swing one way and somebody else has got a different opinion, maybe you can agree to disagree. But here, there's no disagreement. It is fact-based. It is science-based. It is evident on the ground as we see the effects of these extreme weather events. And really, that's what it boils down to, is extreme weather, extreme heat, flash flooding, drought, wildfire. And just like with anything else, the media does sensationalize things, but it's really happening in Florida right now. For instance, when you see these people moving, away from the coast, they're adapting, they're coping with the fact that this hurricane is coming at them. They're boarding up their windows. That's adaptation. They're putting sandbags on their doors, whether it matters or not because of the flooding, we'll see, but they're doing something about it. So heeding the warnings, heeding the evacuation zones. And that, again, is part of the coping and the adaptation. It's before the storms that work is done. It's before the storms and the fires that we have these conversations. So when they do happen, and they will, we are better prepared. We're not so fearful. We have a plan, and maybe we can lessen the impacts of those extreme weather events on our own homes, in our own communities, and our own families.
Akim, have you seen any examples of community organizing around climate in South LA? Have we started this conversation? Can you give us an example?
There are a couple of organizations that are working in climate action, which is one organization I'd like to name them. It's Scope LA, Scope Los Angeles, and they're doing a pretty great fight, and they've been doing it for a few months now. And a few other organizations that we've collaborated with in the past. But what I want to add is that we're in a better place now as organizations in South LA. And I would say it came through the pandemic, because during that time, many organizations began to work together to respond to this need. So I think feeding off of that momentum as well in relation to climate change, and how we were able to mobilize testing sites throughout, the county through that those networks. In regards to climate change, I think we're in a better position to do the same. And I'll bring up a quick example. CORE began in Haiti in 2010 after there was an earthquake in Haiti, if you all remember, the large one in 2010.
Yeah.
And actually there was another one in 2020. Once CORE left and began to help out with COVID-19 testing, 150 employees, over 150 people that were hired in Haiti for CORE are still working there. And once 2020 came around and there was another earthquake in Haiti, unfortunately, we were able to mobilize a lot quicker at that time because they prepared for future disasters. So looking at it,
So building on what we have done, Dr. Carlisle, can we build on what we've put together to fight COVID, to address this issue, do you think, or is it just so much more amorphous? In COVID, we knew what we were up against and we knew what we were supposed to do, and we set up mechanisms to do it. Can we replicate that with climate issues? It seems more difficult.
Well, it's more difficult and easier in many ways also, because clearly the COVID-19 pandemic generated a emergency response on the part of many levels of American society, locally, state governments, federal government, et cetera, et cetera. Climate change is a more slowly developing situation. But one of the good things about it in terms of fighting it is that it's easier to enlist many different levels of our society. And we were talking about young people who would have a great deal of enthusiasm toward fighting climate change. That enthusiasm will remain with them their entire lives. And so that's something that's a source of kind of natural energy that can be harnessed. Again, all change is local, quote unquote. Community organizations like CORE can develop and can implement change locally and advocate for statewide and federal policy changes as a result, like putting on white roofs instead of black tile roofs. So I think we can be more deliberate and more effective and more engaged in terms of dealing with climate change, because we know what the enemy is. We know where the enemy is. We have to develop policies to address the enemy. In COVID-19, it took us a while to really understand, to the extent that we do now, what was going on. And we know that climate change is here with us. And we really have, I think, a very good idea of how to respond. The question is, can we? Do we have the political will to respond to climate change fast enough to make an impact?
And is it self-empowerment, or do we have to wait for government to do it?
Well, the nice thing is that it can be self-empowerment. Again, that 5-year-old child can plant a tree in their backyard, and they can plant a tree in their grandparents' backyard, and they can help their neighbor plant a tree in their backyard. And they can do that. They can start taking light rail instead of riding in a car, on and on and on. There are all sorts of things that individuals at the individual level can do to combat climate change as well.
Okay, so I think we just have a few minutes left, and I want to see if there are questions from the audience that can be answered. Is that Jackie? Is that showing up on the screen or not?
It is. It's in the chat.
It's in the chat.
Area. Yes, you've got a couple of them. Sylvia, I can read one if you'd like.
Yes, can you read one? I can't see it.
I sure can. This one says, the book Ministry of the Future is an excellent pseudo fiction that discusses climate change and its effects in the future. It also provides actionable ways we can move forward. Could this be mentioned?
I
And
could,
it looks like Akim is typing an answer.
and actually I read the book, so I could maybe
Go
take
ahead,
that,
Nina.
that answer. Yes, Ministry for the Future is an incredibly insightful and not so, distant future, because they do talk about, I won't ruin the book if anybody wants to read it, but they do talk about mass extinctions in parts of the world due to either heat or flooding, as we saw in Pakistan, where a third of the country is covered in water. So yes, there are some really interesting ideas in there, stemming from something what's called a carbon tax, where you can incentivize the large polluters, the oil and gas companies, to reduce their emissions and have a real impact on bringing down the greenhouse gas emissions. There are other types of retooling airplanes, for instance. That's a large thing of doing it, and we've got the technology. I mean, we just need to put our minds and our greatest technology against this, and we can create vehicles in the air that don't take gasoline, for instance. So those are just a couple of items in the book, but I'm glad someone brought that up. It is a very interesting book. It is called Ministry for the Future, and is the title of the book. And oh my gosh, the author is escaping me now, but
Yeah,
it's
Kim
a great
Stanley
read.
Robinson.
Yes, Kim Stanley Robinson. Thank you. It's an excellent book.
Thanks for that recommendation, Paul.
Let's see. Malik sent a question. Another coming calamity that disproportionately affects minority communities in climate change. How can voters make their voices heard on this topic? What questions should we be asking our local city and state politicians? Dr. Carlisle, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I know it's kind of a cliche, but I would say voters should ask every politician, what is your climate change agenda?
Oh, that's a good one.
And again, just an easy step. Let's get some white roofs on buildings instead of dark ones that absorb the heat. That can be done. So let's hold our elected officials accountable. Let's see them implementing policies that support eradication of climate change. And that's what voters can do.
Very good. Akim, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to come from a community level.
Okay.
Train us and help us secure jobs in this field. There's a lot of people truly suffering. Gas just went up again. Food prices are crazy, or just our normal day to day. I know I would love for people to come on out and volunteer. Matter of fact, come and volunteer at the garden. We could pass out a few apples or something. We'll be at Mudtown Farms on the 7th, actually, right there in Watts, helping plant trees there. But I would ask for training for those living in these underserved communities, so we're not always underserved. Help us get out of that in a way where we can learn and be productive in this fight that our kids are going to see, we're going to see, with this changing climate. It's like Earth has a fever, and how are we going to help lower that temperature?
Oh, I love that. That's a good way to think of it. Earth has a fever.
I borrowed that, but I'll claim it.
Well, we need to adopt it, because it really fits the discussion that we've had today. And I just want to thank each of you for taking the time to talk about a very important and difficult topic and helping to educate our listeners, educate me about what we're up against and what we can do and how we have to keep paying attention to this topic and learning what our local, statewide, and national leaders are doing so that our communities can survive. It's not an added on issue, it's a survival issue going forward. And we need to begin to think about it in those terms, just as we've thought about COVID as a survival issue. So we've done it. We've done organizing. We've served our community with COVID, and we can do it with climate change. So thank you all very much. I'll let you get on with your day, but we'll meet again. We'll meet again because this has to be an ongoing conversation.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you. Thank you for having us. And we're looking forward to giving you guys an update sometime soon.
Okay.
We may check back right around the winter holidays because it might still be warm.
Ooh, okay. All
Well said,
right.
Akim. Thank you. Thank you, Nina.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good